I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw it sitting there in the estate sale, staring at me with those glassy blue eyes that seemed to follow my every movement. But hindsight is always clearer than the present moment, and in that dusty Victorian parlor, surrounded by the remnants of a dead woman's life, I was only thinking about my daughter's upcoming birthday. Sarah had been begging for an antique doll for months, ever since she'd seen one in a museum exhibit about Victorian childhood. At 8 years old, she was fascinated by history, by old things that carried stories within their worn surfaces. I thought I was being the perfect father when I spotted the porcelain beauty sitting in a child-sized rocking chair, her elaborate lace dress pristine despite what the auctioneer claimed was over a century of existence. That one there, the elderly woman running the sale had said when she noticed my interest, belonged to little Margaret Thornfield. Poor thing died of scarlet fever in 1923, clutching that doll to her chest. The family kept it all these years, but... She trailed off, shaking her head. Well, Margaret's great-niece passed last month, and her children want nothing to do with the old place. The doll was exquisite. 19 inches tall with a bisque head, real human hair and golden ringlets, and the most elaborate dress I'd ever seen on a toy. Her face was painted with meticulous care, rosy cheeks, delicate eyebrows, and those striking blue glass eyes that seemed almost alive. The price was reasonable, especially considering what similar dolls sold for in antique shops. I should have listened to the voice in the back of my mind that whispered warnings as I handed over the cash. I should have paid attention to how the other browsers at the sale gave the doll's corner a wide berth, or how the seller's hands shook slightly as she wrapped it in tissue paper. But I was thinking about Sarah's face on Christmas morning, about the squeal of delight she'd make when she saw her perfect historical companion. The drive home was uneventful, though I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the wrapped bundle in my backseat. Twice, I could have sworn I saw movement from the corner of my eye, but when I looked directly, there was nothing but still fabric and tissue paper. Just nerves, I told myself. Just the excitement of finding the perfect gift. Our house on Maple Street was a modest 2-story colonial that my wife Karen and I had bought 5 years earlier when Sarah was still a toddler. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes on sidewalks and everyone knew their neighbors' names. Safe. Normal. The kind of place where supernatural occurrences belonged only in the realm of late-night movies and campfire stories. I hid the doll in our bedroom closet, planning to save it for Sarah's birthday still 3 weeks away. But that first night, as I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of our settling house, I heard something new. A soft creaking, like old floorboards protesting under a light step. Then another sound, the gentle thud of small feet walking slowly across the hardwood floor above us. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Karen, who was already deeply asleep beside me. The sound came again. Creak. Step. Creak. Step. Like a child pacing back and forth in the hallway outside Sarah's room. I slipped out of bed and crept upstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway was empty, bathed in the pale blue glow of Sarah's nightlight. Her door was slightly ajar, and I could hear her breathing deeply in sleep. Everything was exactly as it should be. But as I turned to go back downstairs, I caught a glimpse of movement from our bedroom doorway below. Just a flash of white fabric disappearing around the corner. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Someone was in our house. I grabbed the baseball bat from the hall closet and made my way downstairs, every nerve ending screaming with alertness. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The doors were still locked, the windows still latched. Nothing was disturbed, nothing was missing. Except when I opened our bedroom closet to check on the doll, the tissue paper was scattered across the floor, and the antique beauty was sitting upright against the back wall, her blue eyes staring directly at me with what I could only describe as malevolent intelligence. I told myself I must have placed her that way and forgotten. Shock and lack of sleep could play tricks on memory. But as I rewrapped her and placed her back in the box, I noticed her dress was dusty, as if she'd been walking through the house. The incident started small after that. Objects moved when no one was looking. The temperature in certain rooms would drop without explanation. And always, there was the sense of being watched. Not just watched, studied. Evaluated. Like a predator sizing up its prey. Karen noticed it too, though she tried to rationalize everything just as I did. "The house is old," she'd say when we'd find books fallen from shelves or chairs turned to face walls instead of tables. "Old houses settle. Things shift. But even she couldn't explain why we'd both wake up at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the sound of music, a tinkling, off-key melody like a broken music box playing somewhere in the darkness. Or why Sarah had started having nightmares about the lady in the pretty dress who stood at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep. 2 weeks before Sarah's birthday, things escalated. I came home from work to find Karen sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and her hands shaking around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "She moved," Karen said without preamble. "I saw her move." "What are you talking about?" "The doll. I went to put away some laundry in our closet, and she was facing the door. When I came back 10 minutes later, she was turned toward the window. I watched her, David. I stood there and watched her head turn slowly to look at me. I wanted to dismiss it as imagination, stress, anything logical. But the fear in my wife's eyes was real, and when I checked the closet myself, the doll's position had indeed changed. She was now facing outward, toward our bedroom, and there was something different about her expression. The painted smile seemed wider, more knowing. That night, Sarah woke us with screams that could have shattered glass. We found her standing in her doorway, pointing down the hall toward our room, her small body trembling with terror. "She was in my room," Sarah sobbed as Karen gathered her into her arms. "The pretty lady was in my room, and she was angry. She said I was sleeping in her bed, and she wanted me to go away." "Honey, it was just a nightmare," I started to say, but Sarah cut me off. "No. She was real. She smelled like old flowers and dust, and her dress made crinkly sounds when she moved. She had a mean face, Daddy. She had a very mean face." I looked down the hallway toward our bedroom, and my blood ran cold. Our door, which I distinctly remembered closing, was now wide open. And from where I stood, I could see into the closet. The doll was no longer in her box. I grabbed the flashlight from the hall table and made my way slowly to our room, every muscle in my body coiled tight with dread. The closet was empty except for hanging clothes and the discarded box. But on our dresser, positioned so she could see the entire room, sat the doll. She was no longer in her elaborate lace dress, instead, she wore a simple white nightgown that I'd never seen before. And her eyes. God help me, her eyes were no longer the innocent blue of painted glass. They were dark, almost black, and they tracked my movement as I approached. I reached for her with trembling hands, intending to put her back in the closet, but the moment my fingers touched her porcelain skin, a shock of cold ran up my arm. Images flashed through my mind, a little girl dying alone, calling for a mother who would never come, decades of sitting in dark rooms, forgotten and abandoned, and a growing, festering anger at the living who continued their lives while she remained trapped in her small, motionless prison. The doll's mouth moved. I swear on everything I hold sacred, her painted lips curved upward in a smile that held no warmth, only malice. "She's mine now," the doll whispered in a voice like autumn leaves scraping across pavement. "The pretty little girl is mine." I jerked my hands away and stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The doll remained motionless, but that terrible smile lingered on her face. From that night forward, our house became a battlefield. Sarah refused to sleep in her own room, claiming the pretty lady visited her every night, standing at the foot of her bed and promising to take her away to play forever. We set up a mattress in our room, but even there, Sarah would wake gasping, pointing to corners where shadows seemed darker than they should be. The doll moved constantly now, never appearing in the same place twice. We'd find her in the kitchen, sitting at the table as if waiting for breakfast. In the living room, positioned in front of the television like she was watching programs. Once, memorably, in Sarah's old room, sitting in the rocking chair by the window, looking out at the street like she was waiting for someone. But the worst was when we'd find her in Sarah's temporary bed beside ours, lying next to our sleeping daughter with one porcelain arm draped possessively across Sarah's chest. I tried everything I could think of. I researched the doll's history and discovered that Margaret Thornfield, the original owner, had indeed died of scarlet fever, but not in 1923 as the seller had claimed. She died in 1897, after weeks of illness during which she refused to be separated from her beloved doll. The family had buried the doll with her, but grave robbers had later desecrated the cemetery, selling whatever they could find. The doll had passed through dozens of owners over the decades, and I was horrified to discover a pattern. Families who owned her reported the same phenomena we were experiencing: moving objects, cold spots, and most disturbing of all, the doll's apparent fixation on young girls in the household. 3 families had reported their daughters going missing. The children were found days later, sometimes miles from home, in a catatonic state with no memory of how they'd gotten there. They spoke only of playing with the pretty lady and seemed to retain no interest in normal childhood activities. 2 of the children never fully recovered, spending the rest of their shortened lives in institutions, whispering to invisible companions about eternal games of tea party and dress-up. I contacted paranormal investigators, priests, anyone who might have expertise in dealing with supernatural entities. Most dismissed my story as stress-induced delusions, but a few took me seriously enough to visit our home. Father McKenna, an elderly Catholic priest with experience in unusual cases, spent an evening with us. He watched the doll carefully, noting how she seemed to respond to his presence. Her head would turn to follow him around the room, and the temperature would drop dramatically whenever he approached her. "This is not a simple haunting," he told us gravely. "The spirit attached to this object has been growing stronger over the years, feeding on the energy of the families who've owned it. It's particularly drawn to children because their spiritual defenses are weaker. Your daughter is in real danger." He attempted a blessing, but the moment he began the ritual, chaos erupted. Picture frames fell from walls, light bulbs exploded in their sockets, and the doll itself let out a shriek that sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the death cry of some small animal. Father McKenna was knocked backward by an unseen force, hitting his head hard enough to require stitches. As the paramedics treated him, he gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Get rid of it," he whispered. "Tonight. Don't wait until morning. That thing is preparing to make its move." But getting rid of the doll proved impossible. I tried throwing it in the garbage, but by morning it was back on Sarah's dresser. I drove it to the city dump and watched it disappear into a mountain of refuse, but when we returned home, there it sat in our living room, somehow cleaner than when I'd left it. I even tried burning it, building a bonfire in our backyard and tossing the doll into the flames. For a moment, I thought I'd succeeded. The lace dress caught fire, and the smell of burning fabric filled the air. But the flames turned an unnatural blue-green color, and through the smoke, I could hear laughter. Not the innocent giggle of a child, but something older, darker, full of cruel amusement. When the fire died down, the doll sat in the ashes completely unharmed. If anything, she looked more alive than before, her cheeks rosier, her eyes brighter. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a simple haunted object. We were facing something that had learned to anchor itself to our world, using the doll as its vessel but no longer dependent on it for existence. It had found what it wanted in our home, a little girl to claim as its eternal playmate, and it wasn't going to be deterred by conventional methods. The attacks on Sarah became more direct after my failed attempts at disposal. She would wake with scratches on her arms that spelled out words like "mine" and "come play." Her toys would rearrange themselves into disturbing tableaus, teddy bears positioned around her bed like guards, or her dollhouse family arranged in tiny coffins made from matchboxes. But the worst incident happened on a Tuesday morning when Karen was at work and I was getting Sarah ready for school. I'd stepped into the bathroom for less than 30 seconds, but when I came back, Sarah was gone. I searched the house frantically, calling her name, checking every closet and corner. Then I heard singing from upstairs, a lullaby in a voice I didn't recognize, sweet and melodic but with an underlying current of madness. I found them in Sarah's old bedroom. My daughter sat in the rocking chair by the window, perfectly still, her eyes glassy and unfocused. The doll sat in her lap, no longer motionless but swaying slightly back and forth, leading Sarah in the haunting melody. "Sarah!" I shouted, but she didn't respond. She continued singing as if I wasn't there, her voice blending with another voice, a child's voice that seemed to come from the doll itself. When I reached for Sarah, the doll's head snapped toward me with inhuman speed. "She's playing with me now," it said in that leaf-scraping voice. "We're going to play forever and ever." Sarah's eyes remained unfocused, but her voice joined the doll's, "Forever and ever, Daddy. Won't that be nice?" I grabbed Sarah and pulled her from the chair, and for a moment, I thought I was going to lose her. She felt incredibly light, as if part of her was no longer fully in this world. The doll tumbled to the floor, but I could swear I heard it laughing as we fled the room. Sarah came back to herself gradually over the next hour, but she retained no memory of the incident. When I asked her about it, she just smiled that same distant smile and said, "I was playing with my friend. She's very lonely, Daddy. She just wants someone to play with forever." That night, Karen and I made the decision to leave. We packed our essentials while Sarah slept, planning to drive to Karen's sister's house 3 states away until we could figure out a permanent solution. We couldn't take much, but we grabbed important documents, some clothes, and Sarah herself. But as we carried our sleeping daughter to the car, I realized we'd made a critical error. In the back seat, sitting in Sarah's car seat like she belonged there, was the doll. She wore a traveling dress of deep red velvet that I'd never seen before, and in her porcelain hands was a small suitcase. "Going somewhere?" she asked in that terrible voice, and Sarah's eyes opened, no longer the warm brown I knew but the same glassy blue as the doll's. "We can't leave Margaret behind, Daddy," Sarah said in a voice that didn't sound quite like her own. "She's my very best friend. She says we're going to have such wonderful adventures together." I looked at Karen, and I saw my own desperation reflected in her eyes. We were trapped. The entity had attached itself not just to the doll, but to our daughter. Running wouldn't solve anything, it would just put other innocent people at risk. That's when I remembered something Father McKenna had mentioned before the failed blessing. He'd spoken of a colleague, a woman who specialized in cases involving malevolent spirits attached to objects. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell was a former psychology professor who'd turned to paranormal research after her own encounter with something supernatural. I called her that very night, standing in our driveway at 2 a.m. while Karen kept watch over Sarah and the doll from inside the car. "I've heard of cases like this," Dr. Hartwell said after I'd given her a brief explanation. "The spirit has formed what we call a symbiotic attachment. It needs a living host to maintain its presence in our world, but it also provides the host with something they crave, in a child's case, often an imaginary friend who promises never to leave them. How do we break it? The traditional methods won't work because the spirit has evolved beyond simple object attachment. But there might be another way. The entity is still fundamentally the spirit of a child, lonely, angry, but still possessing a child's basic needs and fears. Sometimes, the only way to deal with such spirits is to give them what they originally wanted." She arrived the next evening, a small woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested she'd seen things that would break most people's sanity. She brought with her an assortment of tools, not the crosses and holy water I'd expected, but children's toys, old photographs, and what looked like a Victorian-era music box. "Tell me about Margaret," she said as we sat in our living room, the doll positioned on the coffee table between us like a participant in the conversation. I related what I'd learned about the original owner, a sickly child who died alone, clutching her doll, calling for a mother who was too afraid of contagion to comfort her dying daughter. As I suspected, Dr. Hartwell nodded. "Margaret isn't trying to hurt Sarah, exactly. She's trying to recreate the family she never had, the childhood that was stolen from her by illness and death. But her methods have become corrupted by decades of anger and isolation." She opened the music box, and a gentle melody filled the room, the same lullaby Sarah and the doll had been singing that morning, but played at the proper speed, sweet and innocent rather than haunting. The doll's head turned toward the sound immediately, and for the first time since this nightmare began, her expression softened. The malevolent intelligence in her eyes was replaced by something heartbreakingly vulnerable. "Hello, Margaret," Dr. Hartwell said gently. "I know you've been alone for a very long time. I know you just want someone to play with, someone who won't leave you." The doll's mouth moved, and when she spoke, her voice was different, younger, sadder. "Everyone always leaves. Mama left when I got sick. The families who took me home always got scared and sent me away. I just want a friend who'll stay." Sarah, who had been quiet throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "I don't want to leave you, Margaret. But my mommy and daddy are scared. They think you're trying to hurt me." "I would never hurt you," the doll replied, and I could hear tears in that impossible voice. "I just get so angry when people try to take you away. I've been alone for so long, and you're the first person who actually wanted to play with me." Dr. Hartwell leaned forward. "Margaret, what if I told you there was a place where you could be with other children like you? Children who understand what it's like to be different?" She produced a photograph from her bag, a Victorian-era family portrait, but something was off about it. The faces of the children seemed too knowing, too aware, and their eyes held the same ageless intelligence I'd seen in the doll. "This is the Whitmore family," Dr. Hartwell explained. "They've been together for over 100 years. They live in a special house where children like you can play forever without frightening anyone. They've been asking me to find them a new sister." The doll stared at the photograph with intense longing. They wouldn't be afraid of me?" "Not at all. They understand what you've been through. And the best part is, you could take your doll with you, the original Margaret's doll, I mean. You could finally be the little girl playing with her toy, instead of being trapped inside it." I watched in amazement as the doll seemed to consider this offer. The malevolence that had radiated from her for weeks was completely gone, replaced by the desperate hope of a lonely child. "But what about Sarah?" the doll asked. "She's my friend too." Sarah, wise beyond her 8 years, took the doll's small hand in hers. "I'll always be your friend, Margaret. But you need to be with people who understand you better than I can. And maybe when I'm older, I can come visit you sometime." The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. The doll's eyes slowly changed from that unnatural glassy blue back to the painted innocence of an antique toy. The sense of oppressive presence that had hung over our house like a storm cloud began to dissipate. "Will you help me?" the doll asked Dr. Hartwell, and her voice was now purely that of a confused, frightened child. "Will you take me to the other children?" "Of course, dear," Dr. Hartwell replied gently. "But first, you need to let go of Sarah completely. No more visits, no more trying to bring her with you. She needs to stay with her family and live her own life." The doll, Margaret, turned to Sarah one last time. "I'm sorry I scared you," she said. "I just didn't want to be alone anymore." Sarah leaned forward and kissed the doll's porcelain forehead. "It's okay, Margaret. I understand. But you don't have to be alone now." Dr. Hartwell carefully wrapped the doll in a soft blanket and placed her in a special carrying case. As she prepared to leave, she turned to us with a serious expression. "The attachment has been broken, but Sarah may have some residual sensitivity to spiritual phenomena for a while. It should fade as she gets older, but keep an eye on her. And if you ever encounter another antique that seems too good to be true, we'll walk away," I finished. "Trust me, we've learned our lesson." That was 6 months ago. Our house has returned to normal, no more cold spots, no more moving objects, no more sense of being watched. Sarah sleeps peacefully in her own room again and has shown no lasting effects from her supernatural encounter beyond a heightened empathy for others who feel lonely or left out. Dr. Hartwell contacted us once to let us know that Margaret had settled in well with the Whitmore family. Apparently, she'd been delighted to discover that her new siblings had many of the same experiences she had, and for the first time in over a century, she was no longer the only child in a world of adults who couldn't understand her. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I think about what we went through and how close we came to losing Sarah to something that was itself just a lost, angry child. It's made me more aware of the thin boundaries between our world and whatever lies beyond, and more grateful for the normal, everyday moments of family life that I used to take for granted. Sarah still loves antiques and history, but now she approaches old objects with a healthy respect for the stories they might carry. And sometimes, when she's playing alone in her room, I hear her talking to someone I can't see, but her voice is happy and carefree, not the distant, entranced tone she used during those terrible weeks. "Who are you playing with, sweetheart?" I asked her once. "Just Margaret," she replied casually. "She visits sometimes to tell me about her new friends. She says they have tea parties every day and no one ever gets sick or has to leave." I felt a moment of panic, but Sarah's eyes were clear and bright, completely unlike the glassy stare she'd worn when under the doll's influence. "She's happy now, Daddy," Sarah continued. "She just wanted to say thank you for helping her find her real family." I realize now that not all ghost stories end with exorcisms or sage burning or dramatic battles between good and evil. Sometimes they end with understanding, with giving a lost soul what they truly needed all along. Margaret wasn't evil, she was a child who had been alone for too long, whose loneliness had twisted into something desperate and dangerous. But in the end, all she really wanted was what every child wants: a family, friends, and the promise that she wouldn't be abandoned again. The antique doll market has lost some of its appeal for me, I'll admit. But I've learned something valuable from our experience, that the most frightening monsters are often just beings in pain, lashing out because they don't know any other way to ask for help. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is look past the terror to see the hurt underneath. Still, I check Sarah's room every night before bed, and I've made sure she knows that if any of her antique toys start moving on their own, she should tell us immediately. Some lessons, after all, are worth remembering.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.